So I've gathered everything here in a little potting tray, which makes the mess much more contained and easy for me to work at and for you guys to watch what I'm doing just now. But you don't need to have a potting tray. Doing this in your own environment, you can have a newspaper on the table to collect some of the mess, or even something like a dish basin that you would normally be washing dishes in. To have compost in is a good starting point for just having the basis for containing the compost and some of the mess. Now, this activity, I'm going to rattle through it in quite literally a matter of minutes because we don't have all afternoon to do it. But when we're talking about adaptive gardening, it's all about just taking the time to enjoy it, being in the moment. As support workers, as care workers, we're enablers, we are well-being wonder people, and it's not about doing it for your client group. It's not doing it to them, it's doing it with them. So if that means having to take a bit of extra time to plan the activity and strategically place things, I've got everything gathered here today. But if I were doing this out in a setting at a larger table, I would have my bulbs placed about all over the table to invite people to interact with me. And when I'm ready for the daffodil bulb, I would ask Jim to pass the bulbs to me. And that's engaging him in conversation. That's making him feel part of the activity. And it's improving his, or maybe not improving, but it's supporting his motor skills, his dexterity, and a little bit of exercise, having to stretch and push things over. So always think about how you can use the activity to engage and support all your clients, no matter how small that might be. So before I would start my activity as well, I would be passing out some pictures. I don't know if this is if it's a wee bit glary, but this is magazines, bulb magazines that I've been ordering things from, and these are some images of the bulbs that I'm going to be using today. So I would be sharing these with people in advance of the activity, just to set the scene and to visually stimulate them in participating.
Joan, we have a question from Fiona Nichol. She's asking, how does this work with COVID?
In so much as if you're, do you mean, right, okay, can you elaborate, sorry, specifically in what relation to COVID, sorry?
I'll ask Fiona to write us a wee message for that, Joan, thanks. Okay. Oh. When you're passing bulbs to people and trying to engage them, Joan.
Okay, right, okay, thank you. I'm going to come on to bulb rash in a little minute, and that basically is when you're handling bulbs, some people who have got sensitive skins are more prone to some, it's called, like, it's a small skin rash, and it's called daffodil rash actually. Now, my hands are as tough as old boots, so I never wear gloves when I'm gardening, but that's my own choice, okay? When you're doing an activity like this, I would definitely recommend that everybody wears gloves, not because of COVID, but because of the potential of getting a rash from handling the bulbs or any flower material, any plant material for that matter. But during COVID, if you're working in a group, I can't assume anybody's situation, but if you're working with a group who're already in a bubble, I'm assuming that passing the bulbs amongst one another within that bubble using gloves would be an acceptable activity to be asking people to be involved in. Jenny, would I be fair enough saying that? Yep.
Yes, I think you would be right enough there, Joan. I think also that you would be doing doing it with a group that is able to be sitting around a table, you know, with your 1 meter distancing or your 2 meter distancing, or perhaps they're in a bubble and you can do it that way. It would depend on the relationship between the people, I think. So you have to just take that into consideration when you're organising it.
Or alternatively, if you had the funds and it permitted it, instead of having one bulb lasagna, if everybody could make their own, that would be even better. How beautiful would be that? 10 bulb lasagnas outside your front door. I love it.
Indeed.
Okay, Fiona, sorry, Jane, you can check with Fiona that's okay for her, but I'll keep cracking on, but please do ask more questions as we go.
Fiona said thank you, and also we have a question here. Where can you get the potting trays from, Joan?
Okay, can we put up that link, Jenny, later on?
Yep.
The company that I bought a whole raft from fairly recently, and
Sure.
you can buy them from garden centres.
Yep.
Some of the bigger named ones, of which there's a few in Scotland, they do stock them. I've seen them in there myself, but if you go online, you can buy them a little bit cheaper, and I'll share that link with the place where I bought mine from.
And Jill and Jean say they've actually seen them in Pound Stretcher, so maybe you can get them in there as well. There we are.
Even better. Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, yep, perfect. Buy two then.
That's it.
Okay. So we've set the scene, we've got everybody sat around the table. So now we're going to get on to actually making the bulb lasagna. So what is a bulb lasagna? We call it a pot containing layers of bulbs and compost which flower throughout the spring months. Each bulb, miraculously and very cleverly, will make its own way through the layers to emerge from the compost and bloom. And depending on which bulbs you actually choose, you can have flowers from January through to May. January, you would have snowdrops, all the way through to May when you would have your allium. And that's another opportunity to engage with your clients. Ask them, what is your favourite bulb? Is it the snowdrop in January? Snowdrops are my favourite bulb because my birthday's in January. Or is it the little dinky crocus, iris, bluebells, alliums? Have you ever been to the bulb fields in Amsterdam? I haven't. I would love to go and see them. My mum has been, and she still talks about that trip that she went on many, many years ago. I think it is one of these adventures that you go on, and the vision that you experience is something that sticks with you. So explore conversation through the bulbs themselves. It's amazing what you'll learn from some of your clients just by giving them the opportunity to speak. So anyway, today the bulbs that I'm going to use are, I've got some pictures here. Don't know if this angle is any good. Jenny, is that okay? Can you see that?
Yes, I can. Yes.
Okay, so that is a crocus, and that is my little crocus bulb. It's a tiny, dinky little thing. Now, crocus and iris, this is my iris bulb, which I'm going to be using as well, are tiny, but they're not so tiny that most people wouldn't be able to handle them. So they're still nice and tactile to use and big enough to handle. So that was my iris that I've just shown you. You can see that one. And then I'm moving on to my daffodil. Everybody will be very familiar with daffodils. We see loads of them planted roundabouts and road verges going into towns. This is a dwarf daffodil, and this particular variety is Rip Van Winkle. And I don't know if you can see it clearly, but it's got wee frilly yellow heads. And these are the bulbs that you guys are going to get sent out to you. So I hope you like our choice. And last but not least is our tulip bulb, Little Red Riding Hood. And it's the largest bulb that I'm going to be using. So we've got our bulbs. We've got our pot plural. You must ensure that the pot you're using has drainage holes. Bulbs cannot sit in wet compost or wet soil for that matter. The bulb just rots away to nothing and it won't survive at all. So drainage is really important. The next important thing about your container is the depth of it. The depth of the container must be at least 3 times the depth of your largest bulb. Now, I've just already said the tulip is my largest bulb that we're using here today. So this container is 1, 2, 3.
Joan, can I
Three
ask
times.
what size is that pot, please, in inches? What?
Oh my goodness, Jane, I'm a young thing. I'm only 18. I don't do inches.
Oh, so it's centimetres.
No.
Fiona Orvis has asked this question.
No, it is. This pot is a 5-litre pot. It is approximately 15 centimetres by 15 centimetres in diameter and depth. So 15 centimetres will be, I was to run get my, what's that? 12 inches is 30. Oh, that must be about 8 inches. Is that right? Does that help?
That's it.
And Fiona Thackeray has actually put a little note on the chat as well about the COVID risk while we've got a wee moment. And she said, we found that every care home and setting is different with different policies to protect residents and staff from COVID and other hazards. We adapt the activity to suit every situation, so gloves, visors, masks, etc. and passing bulbs would be tailored to suit the group's rules and protocols.
Thank you, Fiona. Okay, so I've got my ruler now. How good is that? 24 centimetres diameter, and this one is about 15 centimetres deep. I thought that was a wee bit narrow, but there we go.
Thank you, Joan.
Okay, so we've now got our pot large enough for the bulbs that I'm actually using here today. I've got another pot here that I'm going to speak about later on, and it's much shallower, as you can see, compared to this one, and not so wide as well. But I've just got a selection of very small bulbs in here. So again, it's all dependent on the size of your largest bulb. Okay, what we also need now is our compost. This compost is actually a pre-packaged bag of bulb fibre that I bought from the garden centre. Basically, all it is a good quality compost with grit already mixed through it. I don't know if you can see the grit here. And the reason there's grit through it is to aid with the drainage. I've already mentioned that we need good drainage, but this drainage ensures that there's always good air holes and drainage holes maintained in the compost. But if you don't have bulb fibre, you can just use a decent compost. Again, buy it at the garden centre. About £5 a bag is a good indicator of price. And that's just a bag of pea gravel that I've just added in here. You can buy that in small bags in the garden centre as well. I'm just going to mix this in. Roughly 3 lots of compost to 1 lot of compost. Sorry, 3 lots of compost to 1 lot of grit. Yep, that's what I mean.
You have another question, Joan. Can you use old grow bags for compost?
Can I say no? And I don't like saying no, because I'm very much, for anybody that knows me, I'm very much a make do and mend kind of girl. But when you use the word old compost, old grow bags, I'm thinking they've already been used, and all the nutrient that's in that compost grow bag has been used up by the tomato plants, or the peppers, or the courgettes, ever what was growing in them. And as much as the actual structure of compost is still there, it's not fabulously wonderful for feeding the bulbs. That would be my concern. Old grow bags are fabulous for filling in. If you had a massive big pot and you were wanting to put your bulb lasagna in that big pot, but really the depth of planting only went halfway down, and you had this void at the bottom that you wanted to be filled up, you could put in like some of your old grow bags and lots of old material in there, because the bulb's roots will never ever make their way down there. So don't use it in your bulbs, but keep it for something else.
Thank you, Joan.
All right. Okay, so I know that my biggest bulb wants to sit about here. So I'm going to fill my compost layer in this pot to about there.
You have another question, Joan. Is it not
Yep.
possible to add nutrients to old compost?
It is possible to add nutrients. You can buy plant food in granular form and in liquid form that you can add to the compost. Bulbs, however, don't actually take food in when they're, I'm going to contradict myself here, having said don't use your the grow bags, but I just don't want you using the grow bag because there could be disease in there as well, and bulbs are really susceptible to disease. I just didn't want to talk about disease at the time. Bulbs don't actually take in food when they're growing up the way. It's when they die back down. We see the bulb, it comes up, it has its flower, and it looks beautiful, and then it starts all whizzing and the leaves turn all yellowy, yunky way. That's them dying back down. Now you should never cut off dying leaves because that is part of the food source for the bulb the following winter. If you want to feed your daffodil bulbs or your tulip bulbs, you should feed them when the plant is dying down. Now that is complete opposite to every other plant you'll ever try to feed in your lifetime. So feed your plants, feed your bulbs, the flowers, when they're starting to die back down in at the end of spring. And then they sit and have a big long snooze during the summertime with a full belly of food. Come autumn, when they wake up just now, their tummies are full of food and that's them ready to rock and roll. Okay? Don't know if that answered the question or if confused it a bit more.
I think it's good to know these intricacies.
I just don't want to confuse people though. I don't want to make it sound like a huge scientific exercise. This is for fun, so it is. Okay, so we're back to our compost now. This is the best bit. Mixing the gravel, mixing the compost, even to pass a basin round. I've worked with some folks living with dementia, and even just handling compost and gravel seems to bring them a moment's relief, and it takes them to a place, a gardening time that they clearly feel comfortable in because their whole being changes. I'm using my hands to fill up here, but again, if that's not appropriate, use something like a plastic mug or a plastic spoon or a kitchen spoon. But again, you'll know your client group better. If a spoon or a mug is confusing for them, if they would think that they were to now eat the compost with the mug, don't be using your mug, okay? But you know, you can be adaptive. Okay, so I've just got my compost into this bottom layer, and I am now going to hopefully place these in for you. All bulbs tend to have a pointy upside and a flatter bottom side. So the bottom side goes in first. So I've got 6 tulips, and I'm just going to place them fairly evenly round my pot. That's that layer in, okay? My first layer of my lasagna. More compost to cover them over. Now I've lost sight of them. I couldn't actually tell you exactly where those 6 are, but that doesn't matter. My next layer is going to go in my daffodils. 1, 2, 3. Yep, that looks about right. Now I've got 9 of these. I'm just going to place them around. You can see top side, little flatter side with some hairs coming out. That's the start of the roots coming out. Placing these all the way around. Here's a mummy and a baby one. This little side bulb, which is called a bulblet, is basically a baby bulb. So I'm just putting these in. Now, actually, I know I've sat that one on top of I could feel the tulip below that one. I'm not going to worry too much about that because these bulbs are incredibly clever. They will work their way round about and they will find their own way to the top. Nothing will stop them apart from a layer of concrete, I would imagine. So I'm not going to worry too much that I've covered things over. Next layer. Now my iris and my crocus are pretty much the same size. I'm not going to get hung up when measuring them. So I'm just going to, again, spread them about evenly because they're all going to come up at different times. My crocus will come up end of February, early March. Then my iris will come up middle March maybe. Yeah, middle, end of March. The daffodils, they'll peek through late March, early April, followed by the tulips in April time. Okay, so I could now completely cover these with compost and take more gravel that I mix into my compost and just put a layer over the compost layer, and you'll just have this very plain but tidy looking pot that can sit all winter and mind its own business. And when the tulip, what's in here is iris and bluebells that are in here. When the iris start to come through, you'll start to see the little green shoots, and that's really quite an attractive display in itself. You get to see the leaves and the stems forming, and that is an interesting chatting point itself. But I want to make my container a little bit more interesting, have something to look at throughout the winter months. And this is a packet of winter flowering violas, which are readily available in the garden centre at the moment. So I'm just squeezing the bottom of the section and carefully tugging at the top, and it just quite literally pops out. I'll just quickly do a few. Now remember, my bulbs are all sitting in here. I'm just going to tease these roots a little bit, but they don't really need too much of a teasing. They'll soon work their way out. This is another job that somebody could be doing while you're chatting about the bulbs. Sitting, teasing something like this out. It's a meaningful activity because it has purpose and they're contributing to the job in hand, but there's no great skill involved, as you can see. So what I'm doing now is I'm just placing these and I'm wiggling it down into the compost because I want my finished height to be below the layer, the edge of my pot here. I don't want it sitting proud. Then I'm just going to infill and compost. This is where newspaper and a potting tray comes in really handy because you can be as messy as you want. And the mess can be quite easily tidied up. So I'm just taking thumb, pointy finger, thumb, as if I'm going to strangle the plant, but I'm not. And I'm just firming in round about so it's got good purchase. And you can maybe see my level here. I've got a watering level, it's called left, okay? So that when there's a deluge of rain comes, the compost doesn't spill over the side. There's always space here for water to gather and then eventually drain out through the bottom. Now, in true Blue Peter style, I have one that I planted up several weeks ago, only I used purple and yellow violas, and we've just used cream coloured one there. Now, sadly, we don't have scent in this Zoom session. We're going to have to speak to Zoom about that. But the perfume that's coming off of these violas is incredible. And again, I would take the time to explore with my client group I was working with, who likes this smell, who doesn't like the smell. And that's okay to not like the smell. But one thing I would like to really point out to you is it's really important keep on deadheading these violas. The more we deadhead them, and deadheading is taking off the dead flower or the dying flowers. Now, none of these look particularly pathetic, but it's really good to keep on nipping them out. And I'm just taking my thumb and finger, and I'm just nipping, following the flower down to where it joins the stem, the main stem, and nipping it out. These are heavenly. I would gather these and use them as a session later on in the day or the following day, and talk about the scent and the colour, and perhaps use them for a dried flower collage picture. Now, I don't know if you can see these. We've got buds just coming up here. So the more I deadhead the passing flowers, the more buds I'll get. And it also keeps the arrangement much more compact and showy. So that's that one. I'll just leave that sitting there so we can see it. So what else can I tell you about watering? It's chucking it down here in Ayrshire. I don't know what it's doing with you guys, but it is awful here. This is the first time I've ever dried plants in my life. When I brought these in earlier on to show you, I thought I'm going to have to dry these off. So I actually got a towel and I dried them. So these are not getting any water from me whatsoever. I'm keeping them raised off the ground a little bit. I've just got some stones that they're sitting on to help with the drainage, to make sure that there is no water logging in the pot. If it became a dry spell when the bulbs were due to flower, now I'm going to give the example of this past springtime. April, we can all recall when lockdown started. April was a beautiful month. Now I have got many pots outside and I have many tulips in my many pots. And this was probably the first year that I can recall actually having to water my tulip bulbs. I could see that they were growing, but they were growing really slowly. And I thought, oh my goodness, that's because it's so dry. We've not had rain for weeks and weeks. We're all benefiting from the lovely summer, the lovely spring weather, but the bulbs needed water then. So refrain from watering during the dreich winter months, but when the bulb is due to start flowering, just be aware, and if it is a dry spell, give it a wee squish of water, and it's amazing how it would come away. And there we have it. Bulbs, once they finish flowering, we can actually put the whole pot away somewhere, out of sight, out of mind, to an extent, round the back of the hut or somewhere. Let the plants all die back down, give them a bit of a feed if you would like to, and then next spring bring them back out again, and it will go through, it will repeat the process for you again next year. Okay, so there we have it, your bulb lasagna.
That's excellent. Thank you very much, Joan. I wonder, we maybe have some more questions if you'd like to sort of stay by your tray, and in case people want you to demonstrate something. I wonder, Jane, if we got any more questions that people wanted to ask.
Well, Fiona has said old grow bags and spent compost can contain more pests, for example, slugs and snail eggs too. And then somebody did ask, which bulbs do you decide to go in first? And Fiona Thackeray said the biggest goes at the bottom of the pot. So, and we had a very nice comment saying possible virtual scent, Joan, for Zoom, which is very funny. So, one for the future.
Yeah.
So that's all the questions that are there. So thank you very much for your nice comments. We have one here from Catherine Gibb. Does the viola come back every year?
No, your winter viola is an annual plant, which means it only survives for one growing season. But unlike your summer violas that really only do flower May through to September, I can keep winter violas flowering from just now, October, all the way through to next summer. It must be in their breeding. I don't know how it works. So I always think you get better value for money out of your winter violas, but, and this is a big but, you must keep on top of the deadheading. You must be nipping out at least once a week out there, nipping, deadheading, keeping it nice and compact, constantly encouraging it to produce new flowers. Once a flower has finished, once a plant is finished flowering, like these annuals, it thinks it's done its job. It was bred to flower once in the season. But if we keep on tricking it by taking off its flowers before it's finished flowering itself, it thinks it hasn't made enough flowers, so it makes more buds to make more flowers. So we're a wee bit naughty by deadheading. But winter flowering violas will last into next summer if you deadhead them, but you won't get a second winter out of them, no.
Okay,
No.
and this is another question. I'm a first-time gardener. Oh, it's jumping. I'm a first-time gardener. So what do you do with the violas? Do you take them out at some point?
Yes, once they start to look really ropey and, you know, they're not going to come back from looking ropey. How about that?
Okay.
So next April, May time, when the last of the tulips have died back down, I would just pull out the clumps of violas and add them to my compost heap.
Okay, we have another question. Can I plant a Bulb Lasagne directly into the ground?
Yes, you can. You can, absolutely. Just be careful that you're not planting into a wet area in the garden.
Okay.
If your borders are particularly wet, what you could do is you could make up planters like this of Bulb Lasagnes and place them in and around the borders, so that from the windows you're getting that display of flowers coming up over the weeks and months, but you're not having to go into the ground and actually having to plant them into the ground.
Lovely. We have another question from Fabian here. What do you do with them after the flowering season? Do you absolutely need to take them off the ground, or can you leave them, put the pot somewhere dark and cool, it's jumped again, and take it out next winter?
Jane, could you repeat the first part?
Yeah, certainly. It jumps, Joan, when I'm trying to read it. That's why. So it says, what do you do with them after the flowering season? Do you absolutely need to take them off the ground?
Okay. After they have finished flowering, if you can put the entire pot somewhere sheltered, preferably out of the rain, so that the bulbs get the chance to dry out, that's their dormant period. They're a bit like us. They want to go to a dry, warm place for their big long snooze. So they do that in the summertime. Many people lose their bulbs and their borders because they don't appreciate how damp their borders are during the summertime, and the bulb doesn't get that chance to dry out enough for it to rest, for it to reenact what it's meant to be doing come the following autumn. In fact, in the Netherlands, where they grow tulips, mainly for cutting, granted, but they actually lift every single bulb in the summertime because the ground is too wet for the bulbs to have their dormant rest in the summertime. So once the tulips have actually had their flowers stems cut off of them, the bulbs are all lifted and stored in a dry, dark place, and then they're physically all replanted in autumn to grow again the following spring. They get harvested, cut up for floristry, for sales, and repeat, repeat, repeat. Okay.
Okay. Another question here from Ashley. Are there any annuals you would recommend for planting on top of your Bulb Lasagne?
Okay, the violas, I think your violas are your best bet for winter flowering annuals. In my opinion, they're the ones that flower the best. They produce flowers on limited sunshine. You get other lovely little daisy-like annual plants called bellis, B-E-L-L-I-S, that rhymes with trellis. They're quite cute. My mum loves them. She always buys them. They seem to do okay, but I don't think they flower as well as violas. And you also get winter pansies. Now, winter pansies are beautiful, big, blousy blooms compared to little dinky violas. But I think you've really got to be on top of that deadheading of the violas to ensure that they keep on flowering as well. I think violas are your safest bet.
Okay. There are a few more questions on here, Joan, but both Jenny and Fiona have answered them actually on the chat. So I hope everybody's quite happy with that. And we're actually going to have to stop the Q&A there, I'm afraid. Thank you very much, Joan.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joan. That's brilliant. What if we can show our appreciation to Joan there with our giving her a wave and a little thank you on our reactions. That'd be brilliant. Thanks very much, Joan. That's terrific.